Assalamu alaikum dear viewers. Viewers, in today's video we will be discussing some of the remaining aspects of our topic, the national power. I have already elaborated determinants, factors or elements of national power in my previous video. Today we will be talking about how to evaluate the national power. As you know that there are different determinants like geography, population, natural resources, technology, industrial capacity, military preparedness, diplomacy, governmental organization, national character, national morale, leadership, and there were various other elements as well. It is quite difficult to evaluate the national power even if all these elements or determinants are there in a country. Even then it is quite difficult to evaluate it, and in doing so, during the evaluation, we need to keep in mind several factors or features, and only then we will be able to understand the real value or the real depth of national power of a country. So without further ado, I would like to come to the main points directly. First of all, the first aspect which we need to keep in our minds while evaluating the national power of a country is the relativity of the national power. Now, what does it mean? National power can never be evaluated in isolation. National power of any country can never be evaluated in isolation. For example, we will have to take into account the national power of other countries as well. For example, if a country possesses all the above factors which I have just listed a few minutes ago, even if a country possesses all of those factors, even then we cannot say that this is a powerful country because it has got all the determinants of national power, because country A might possess all these aspects, but country 2 might possess it in greater value than country A, or country B might possess it in greater value than country A. So that is why we need to keep in mind the relative power of, or the relevant national power, relative national power of country B or other countries in the region or on the global stage as well, particularly those countries in the neighborhood. For example, if we talk about the national power of Pakistan, so yes, Pakistan has got almost all those determinants which I have listed, which we have discussed, but still we need to keep in mind that India is a big country and India must have all those aspects as well. So then we will try to compare the national power of Pakistan one by one, all those factors one by one, with those factors in India, and only then we will come to know that whether Pakistan is more powerful or India is more powerful. This is just a simple example of all these powers. Likewise, in order to evaluate all those factors in the United States of America and then come to the conclusion that whether the United States of America is more powerful or not, we need to evaluate all those determinants in other countries, particularly those which are rival to the United States of America on the global stage. So only then we will come to know about the extent of the national power of the United States of America. Point number 2, that is qualitativeness of various factors of the national power. It is not merely the quantity, because the mere quantity is meaningless in national power. It should be the quality of those determinants in a country as well. For example, a country has got military soldiers more than country A has got more soldiers than country B. Country A has got more airplane fighter jets than country B, and likewise the submarines and everything. But then we will have to assess whether the quality of the soldiers is better than the quality of soldiers of country B or not, or the quality of those fighter jets, whether, like for example, there are fighter jets but the speed of the fighter jets is less, the number of fighter jets is more in country A than the number of fighter jets in country B. But then the question arises whether the speed of the fighter jets of country A is also more than the speed of the fighter jets of country B, whether the range of the fighter jets of country A is more than the range of the fighter jets of country B, and so on and so forth. So we will have to evaluate the value, or the quality of those factors as well. Likewise, the size and the population also holds the same. For example, if the size of a country is great, is large than another country, but then we will have to look into the factors which are basically making size as an edge for that country, and that is the resources in that territory. So if the size is large than the size of country B, but still the resources in country B are more than the resources in country A, so then the small size even becomes an advantage over a country which would have large size. Likewise is the case of population. Take the example of India and take the example of China. The population of India and China is almost, you can say that it's equal almost. There is very less difference between the two countries. But then if you look into the quality of the population of China and the quality of the population of India, then you will come to know that there is a huge difference between the quality of populations of both countries. So, and then the Indian population is more than the Australian population, but still the quality of population of Australia is very much supreme than the quality of the population of India. So all these things we need to keep an eye on the quality of it. Mere quantity does not matter. It is just meaningless. The mere quantity might become a burden if the quality is not there. Then interdependence of all these factors. So these factors in isolation, again, they do not mean anything if we evaluate all these factors in isolation. It is the interdependence of these factors over one another and the interconnectivity of those factors which makes a country stronger. So we will have to look into that as well, that whether all those factors are interdependent on each other, and if they are interdependent on each other, then we will have to look into the quality of all other factors as well, not only one factor. So this interdependence of different factors also matter. Then the ability to use these factors or these resources is also a matter of understanding, or also a very important matter, because the existence of certain element does not lead to the national power, as I have already discussed that. It is the ability of a polity or of a state, whether that state is able to use all the available resources with it, or whether it is not able to use it. So if the state has got all the available resources with it, all the factors, all the elements, all the determinants of national power with it, but still if that particular country does not exhibit the skills or exhibit the will to utilize those factors for its well-being, to project itself as a powerful country, even then we cannot call that okay, all these factors were there in that country and still that country is, it's the national power of the country is very much there, but that country is quite weak. So then we are missing this one factor, that that country cannot utilize, it is not able to utilize its resources which are available to the country. Then the dynamic of the national power is also a very important aspect. For example, oil, before oil it was coal. So later on coal was replaced by the oil. So at that time coal was a determinant of national power, but the dynamic is so that now the world has shifted from coal to oil. So now oil is a very basic element of national power. So we need to keep it in mind that whether that particular resource which is there with that particular country is about to be outdated or not. The likelihood is there that oil will soon be replaced by uranium, because this is an era of nuclear age. Every country is in the quest to develop its nuclear capability for peaceful purposes, for power generation and other purposes, not particularly for the purpose of military use, but it is there. It is the will, it is the desire of every country to have nuclear capability, to enrich the uranium and plutonium and then utilize it for the well-being of its population. So oil will be outdated in a few decades, I guess. And if the solar energy is harnessed very well, then we will see that even uranium or plutonium, like this nuclear capability, will also nuclear capability for power generation will also become outdated in a few decades time, like 5 to 6 decades time or 4 to 3 decades time. It will be outdated. So this is the dynamic of the national power, that we need to assess the value of an available resource with a country, and then we need to think about the advancement of technology in that particular field, and then we will be able to assess whether that country will be powerful in future or not. Take the example of Saudi Arabia. Right now, about 2 to 3 years ago, Saudi Arabia was a big economic power just because that it had this the weapon of oil in its hand, and it was leading the OPEC country. But now, due to the plummeting demand of oil and the more supply in the market, the demand of oil is decreasing and the supply is there in the market, and it is quite probable that Saudi Arabia is facing economic problems, because oil is there but the purchaser is not there in the market, and the prices of oil the price of oil is not that much in the international oil market right now. But just imagine after 5 to 6 years, when the whole world, majority of the vehicles in the world in the developed countries, they will be converted to electric mode, and these hybrid vehicles are almost out there in the market, even in the underdeveloped or developing countries. But the developed countries are experimenting on bringing electric vehicles to the market. Even Pakistan has announced that it will be soon developing its technology of bringing electric vehicle to the market. So then what will be the level of, Saudi economy, what will be the condition of Saudi economy afterwards? So this dynamic is being missed in the Saudi Arabian assessment. If we are missing this dynamic, of national power, that soon oil is going to be an outdated resource for humankind. So if we are missing this aspect, then we will be not in a better position to evaluate the national power of any particular country, any given country. Then preparedness is also a factor. Now there is this preparedness issue is there. Like take the example of country A and country B. Country A's soldiers are very much prepared to meet any sort of challenge, but country B's soldiers are not that much prepared, though the number of the soldiers is again greater than country A. The number of soldiers in country B is greater than country A, but the level of preparedness of those soldiers is not up to the mark. So if this level of preparedness is not there, then we can not count on this factor alone, like the quantity of soldier. We cannot count on that. Take the example of the Chinese and the Indian standoff in Sikkim and Ladakh right now. Why the Indians could not respond to the Chinese onslaught or the Chinese encroachment in those areas? Because the Indian troops which were serving over there in Ladakh and Sikkim, which are very cold areas, they were prepared to fight in those circumstances. But since there was a pact between the two countries, they were not supposed to fire a bullet on each other. This pact was there. But this fresh supply of Indian troops was also a problem. They could easily mobilize troops from other areas of India to Ladakh and Sikkim, but then acclimatization of 1 month is required for those new troops for their bodies to be acclimatized with the weather conditions in those areas, and then be able or be ready to fight, to function properly. So this readiness was not there. It needs almost 1 month for the soldiers to go there and spend their time in igloos and then be ready to come out of their igloos and fight with the enemy. So that thing was also in the Indian minds, and it was the delayed Indian response. This was also one of the factors of the delayed Indian response, though there are many other factors as well, but this was one of the factors. So this level of preparedness is also very important. Then the actual and the potential importance of those elements. For example, the analysis of various elements must not be limited to available data on the present or the recent past. We should also keep in mind, we should also have an estimate of the future trends, like the potential, that whether this resource is there, and then what will be the situation in future. So this potential should also be one of the factors. Again, take the example of India and China. Okay, fine, for the sake of an argument, we agree that Indian soldiers could fight the Chinese on that border. But then what could have been the future implications for the whole of the country, that is the Indian country, of that standoff or that conflict? So that potential was missing. Like the potential was that India could face a lot of difficulties in economic fields as a result of that standoff, or as a result of in the escalation of that conflict. So that is why India refrained from escalating that conflict with Chinese over that border. So it is also one of the most important factors, and we should not ignore this factor. And then again, this evaluation of potential and actual and potential factors, it should be made on regular basis. It should not be a one-time assessment. It should be made on regular basis, and only then we will be able to know that whether a particular country will be able to meet the future challenges or not. Because future, as I usually say, that change is the only permanent thing. So if change is the only permanent thing, then we will have to assess whether a country is ready to embrace change or not. If a country is not ready to embrace change, then that country might actually have edge in some factors over the other country. But if it is not ready to embrace the change, then in future the likelihood is there that this country would be having no more edge over the other country. So this is another aspect of national power which we need to take care of during the evaluation process of a country's national power assessment. Then limitation on the national powers, it is okay, up till now we have covered all of the aspects of the national power and how to evaluate or assess the national power. But then there are some other aspects in which we put some limits on the national power of a particular country, because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, as the famous maxim goes. So power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So then there are some limitations on the national power of any country. It is a right of every country to exercise the national power in international relations. But then the unlimited power of states can be a source of war in international on international stage. So that is why this limitation is very much there, and this limitation is quite important. So unregulated power is not desirable by any state, though every state wants to have unregulated power, but then the rest of the countries, they do not accept this unlimited power, and then they try to come up with a lot of tools and techniques and mechanism to harness a particularly powerful country, a particular country, right? One most important aspect in this regard, which puts a limit on the national power, is that of balance of power. As I have already discussed in the class, and I will, for your understanding, again try to elaborate this balance of power. For example, country A is powerful, and there are some other countries which feel threatened from the power of country A. So what are the options with these countries, these weak countries? Option number one is that they will have to build their own capabilities to match the power of this country. Each individual country should build their own capabilities to match the power of this country. But if they are somehow unable to develop their capabilities individually, then they group together against this very powerful country. And in this regard, 2, 3 or 4 countries together, they balance the power of this one country, which is actually threatening all of them individually. So they group together, they form an alliance, and then this balance of power is a check on the national power of any other state. We have seen the examples of this balance of power in the 18th century Europe, and then later on we have also seen this balance of power, but this balance of power is mainly related to regional balance of power in the current era, like the balance of power between India and Pakistan, the balance of power between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth. This is now a regional balance of power, because up till now the United States of America was the sole superpower for the past you might say 22 or odd years, 21, 22 years, the United States of America was the sole superpower. So there was no actual balancer of that power of the United States of America. But then the United States of America act as a global hegemon. So it just tried to balance relations of different competing balance of power systems in the at regional level. And one example is that of India and Pakistan, in which the United States of America tried to diffuse tensions between the two countries on several occasions, so that their conflict does not escalate into an all-out nuclear war or on an all-out international conflict. Then the escalation of tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia are also managed by the United States of America in different ways, so that this regional tension does not become an international source of conflict between different great powers and the sole superpower. I hope I have made my point clear. If there is some question, you can ask in the comment questions in this video, and you can ask me. Those who are my direct student, they can even ask in the comment question, and then I will respond during the class time, or even respond in my text. So just comment on my video whatever you want, whatever kind of clarification you need regarding this or any other issue which you think that clarification is required. Then another limitation on the national power of a country is international law. International law, it is a body of rules that the nation's state accept as binding upon them, and which regulates their behavior in international relations. So it is always about the behavior of a particular country, that okay, this country is behaving in a very rough manner, in a very rude manner with the rest of the members of international community. So international law is basically a check on it. It regulates the behavior of that particular country. This law is basically based or backed by the common consent, natural law, international morality, world public opinion, and some other factors, domestic laws. Then these are derived. The laws in international affairs or international law is mainly derived from domestic laws, and all these things, like a conglomerate of the world public opinion, it is a conglomerate of the national opinions of different countries. So this is based by the international actor, and it acts as a major limitation on the national power of any country and the misuse of power by any state. It basically initiates the do's and don'ts in international relations for states. Then what happens if a country violate the norms or the international laws, the international norms or the international law? Then it usually faces sanctions from various actors, from that forum, that particular forum, which is usually the United Nations, and then its different agencies. So it is faced with sanctions if it violates or if it intends to violate certain international norms. But then there is a problem in international law. I will be discussing these things in more detail when I will be discussing this international law in a specific video dedicated for this topic. But right now, just for your understanding, international law is a very weak body of rules and regulations. Why it is a weak body? Because in domestic law we find a proper implementation mechanism of this domestic law, like the force of executive is there, which implements the rules or the law of the land. But on international stage, everybody is an equal sovereign, and this force of executive is often missing or lacking. Like for example, Israel is violating the international law, but Israel can only be punished when the United States of America and different members of the European Union or different powerful countries of the European Union decide that they need to take care of this issue of Israel ingression or Israel aggression on the Arab countries, particularly the Palestine. Only then Israel can be punished. Otherwise, Israel cannot be punished. But then we see, on the other hand, when there is a mild violation or even an iota of violation, an expectation of violation is there in the minds of the policy makers in these powerful countries by a weak state such as Iraq, then the international law comes into action. Or by a weak state such as Afghanistan, then the international law comes into action and punish that weak state, because some powerful countries desire, or some powerful country decide, or some powerful countries will, that they will be punishing that particular country. In case of Israel, these powerful countries do not will to punish this aggressor. But in case of Iran, in case of Afghanistan, in case of Iraq, in case of, you might call, Syria, Libya, Egypt, they decide that they need to punish it. So then the international law comes into play or comes into force. So this is a problem with the international law. That is why it often fails to meet the pressure exerted by a powerful nation pursuing aggressive nationalism. This is a problem with the international law. Now, this is aggression. We have seen many instances of aggression in the past 2 decades, but international law did not come to the rescue of the weak states. This is a problem with international law. Then international morality is another check on the national power of any other country. Just as human behavior in a society is regulated by a set of moral norms or rules, likewise behavior of states in international environment is also limited by international morality. Then international community accepts certain values such as peace, order, equality, goodness, mutual help, respect for life and liberty of all, and respect for human rights of all as right and good values. So if these values are violated anywhere, then the principles of international morality come into play, and they keep an eye, they keep a check on the power of that aggressor. That okay, these are some of the principles of international morality, and you are violating these principles, so you need not to violate these principles. So at times you might see that even powerful countries, they refrain from the use of excessive power. Like take the example of Afghanistan again. Let me give you the example of Afghanistan. On the one hand, when the international law failed to harness the United States of America and its allies in Afghanistan from killing civilians, the principles of international morality was a very potent check on the power of the United States of America, which refrained it from killing civilians in carpet bombing in large scale. The United States of America could also use limited nuclear weapons on Afghanistan to eliminate all of the people who were somehow sympathizers of the Taliban, or who were directly linked with the Taliban, or who were themselves Taliban. But even then, the United States of America did not resort to use that kind of power, just because that it was under the check from the principles of international morality. So this is another aspect which keeps a check on the national power of any country. Then another check on the power of a country is the world public opinion. As you know that there is the democratization of the foreign policies of the countries in this current age of information technology. So everybody's voice matters. That is why the reflection of people's voices can be seen in the foreign policies of different countries, and that reflection might not only be the reflection of its own citizens, but it might be the reflection of the people of other countries as well, of the voices of the people of other countries as well, because of this IT revolution which we are experiencing these days. So a world public opinion is formulated in such a manner which keeps a check on the power of different powerful countries. For example, there are many movements across the globe which are asking different powerful countries to change their policies, or a particular set of policies, or just one policy. I'll be citing some of the examples of such movements, and then you will be in a better position to understand the point which I am just trying to make over here. For example, the global peace movement, it is a check on the power of, on the national powers of different countries. Like if somebody is violating the peace of the world, these voices from the global peace movements, that particular country will not be able to ignore these voices. Then the global movement for the preservation of the Earth's ecological balance. Again, nobody can ignore these voices. They are for the whole of the globe, so people cannot ignore these voices. Then the environment protection movement, which is against this emission of carbon dioxide, the emission of carbon dioxide, or the emission of carbon from the exhaust of factories in different developed or industrialized nations. So nations cannot ignore these voices. Then the human rights protection movements, so people or states, even powerful ones, cannot ignore these movements. Nowadays you might have, if you are listening to, since you are the students of international relations, so I'm sure that you would be keeping an eye on the international news as well. So there is after the death of George Floyd in the United States of America 2 weeks ago, there was a movement which gathered momentum, and the movement names is it is an old movement, but it gathered momentum now again. That is the Black Lives Matter movement. So this Black Lives Matter movement, it gained momentum all across the European countries as well, not only in the United States of America, but all across the European countries. And people come out on the streets in solidarity with the black communities in their respective countries, in all the developed countries ruled by the white elite. These kind of things, you know, this is the world opinion, and then it becomes really difficult for even powerful countries to ignore these opinions or to ignore these voices which arise from across the globe. So what happens, that fear of adverse public opinion often restrict or limit the power of these states, because if the acceptability, as I have told you, that the number one quality or number one the number one parameter on which you can measure the power is that the ability to make other people do something which one wants them to do. So this is the ability. So if a country is facing adverse public world public opinion, then that country would not be regarded as a respectful country in international relations by the people across the globe. So that country cannot risk losing its position of respect in the eyes of the population of the world. That is why it matters in the current age and time, and it is a very effective check on the power or on the national power of the most powerful nations. Then international organizations is another check on the power or the national power of the powerful nations. Since 1919, we are living in an era of international organizations. It was the League of Nations at the end of the First World War. Then it was suspended during the Second World War. This League of Nations failed and the Second World War started, and then there was no international body. But at the end of the Second World War, then we saw the United Nations, which is an international body. And now this international body raises its voice for against different aggressions, various aggressions by the powerful countries across the globe. So these voices cannot be ignored. The voices of these international organizations, or this international organization in particular, cannot be ignored. Then this international organization has got many specialized agencies. For example, it is having the World Food Program, which when raise its voice for the people struck by famine in Africa, then the whole of the world respond to the famines of Africa, because the World Food Program has just, you know, raised its voice in favor of famine struck people. Then, for example, if the World Health Organization is another specialized agency of this United Nations. So if the World Health Organization raises an issue related to the health, to the global health, like this current pandemic, then people cannot ignore, powerful countries cannot ignore these voices, and then they come to the rescue of those poor countries whose response to such calamities is somehow not up to the mark. So this international organizations, they are a check on the national power of different countries as well. For example, if the World Health Organization, or if United Nations, if UNHCR raises voices, for example, against the violation of refugees' rights in a very powerful country, let's say in different countries in Europe, when the Syrian migrants were going over there, and then when people from the North African countries like Libya were going to Europe in launches and boats, and when they were stopped from entering into the European territory, then this UNHCR raised its voices for those people, and these powerful countries could not ignore the voices raised from the forum, from the platform of the UNHCR or the United Nations. So these European powerful countries could not ignore these voices, and then they somehow devised a mechanism to host these communities over there. Similarly, just look into the case of Rohingya Muslims who migrated from Myanmar to India and Bangladesh. So they were refugees, and then UNHCR again raised voices for them, and the World Health Organization again raised voices for them during this pandemic, that the health issues of these people should be taken care of, otherwise this pandemic will rapidly spread in the refugee communities in Bangladesh and India, which were Rohingya Muslims. So then you cannot arrest the spread of this pandemic. So these powerful countries, but in particular India, could not ignore, because when these powerful organizations or agencies of the United Nations raised its voice, then India came under pressure from multiple fronts. Number one, the voices of these organizations or heads of these organizations, specialized agencies, were enough. They were enough alone for India, but then these voices were magnified because different world leaders and people across the globe also added their voices to the voice of the UNHCR in this regard. So then India had to do something for this, and they added their voices to the voices of WHO. So then India had to do something for the health aspects or the health problem prevailing in those areas as well. So this is the importance of international organizations. And then there are regional organizations. One is that one big organization which I just mentioned, the United Nations, and previously the League of Nations. But then there are regional organizations as well, like the European Union, the ASEAN, the SAARC. SAARC is somehow not that much active, but the ASEAN, the Shanghai Cooperation Organizations. So these organizations, you can just name them. You can think about a lot of other organizations which are working all over the globe, regional organizations which are working. So these are a check on the national power of either global powers or regional powers. So the voices of these organizations or the existence of these organizations is a check on the national powers of different powerful countries. Then the concept of collective security in this modern age is again a check on the national power of different countries. Now I'll explain what do we mean by the collective security, because since this is just an introductory class of international relations, so it will be difficult for most of you to understand this concept of collective security. It is a system which is based on the membership of international actors, and if there is one violator of peace, and that violation of peace might ultimately result into the violation of international or into the disruption of international peace, then all of the members of the international community, they come together on a platform, and that platform is particularly different organizations. So this collective security is that okay, you are a violator, now you are threatening the peace of this region, but if you threat the peace of this region, particularly a relatively powerful regional actor A, actor B might come to save the peace of this region, and it will challenge your authority. Though you are a global power, it will challenge your authority in this particular region, on this particular aspect, and your clash with that regional power might convert into might endanger the global peace. So that is why we will not allow you to endanger the global peace, and we will punish you collectively. All of the members of the international community, they come together against that one violator, that one aggressor, and then they threat that particular country to you can say that then they threat that particular country about the repercussions of the actions of that country. And there is one more example of this collective peace, is that is the example of NATO. NATO was there, it was formulated in the 1940s, late 1940s, just to keep a check on the expansionist designs of Soviet Union in Europe, in Central and Western Europe. So it was limited to the Eastern Europe. So this NATO was there, and all of the small countries of Central and Western European continent, these European countries, they became part of that alliance. The power of the United States of America was behind, and it is behind this of this alliance of NATO. So then Soviet Union, the expansions or the expansionist designs of Soviet Union were effectively checked, because then Soviet Union could not even incorporate a small country, but which is a NATO member country. It could not incorporate, it could not commit acts of aggressions, allegedly, just because that collective security was there. There was a pact between them, and the NATO charter was there that attack on one would be considered as an attack on all. So then the expansion of Soviet Union was effectively checked. And likewise, it is again the example, the United States was there on the back of it, the main power behind the Central Treaty Organization and the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, SEATO and CENTO. It was there, and again it was devised, or it was aimed to check the spread of communism in these regions. NATO was there for the European areas, CENTO was for the Middle East countries, and SEATO was Southeast Asian countries. So it was, as I have discussed in one of my previous lectures, that it was like a crescent carved around Soviet Union. So Soviet Union could not spread neither in Europe, nor in the Middle East, and nor in Southeast Asian countries, and this collective security was there. So it is a check on the national power, or on the power of any other country. Then we have this arms control and disarmament. This is again a concept. Arms control, it refers to the control on the development of further arms. Like, okay, you have a pile of arms and you are in an arm race with a particular country, but now you need to stop it over here. That country A and country B, they need not to indulge in an arm race, in an indefinite arm race with each other, or in an infinite arm race with each other. So that is the arms control, and it was basically signed between the USSR and the USA, the then USSR and the USA, that they come to some terms with each other, and then they agreed that they would not be developing, like, you know, weapons which could be used to fight in space and this and that. So all these things, these comes under the arm controls, and this is a very cumbersome philosophy, a very cumbersome concept, and there are many examples, but going into the detail of those examples is not the scope of this particular lecture right now, and maybe it is not even the scope of this introduction to international relations. So that is why I would not be diving into that. Then disarmament, it is the liquidation of your arms. Like, you know, you have already got some weapons, but you came to the conclusion that these weapons can never be used, because it would be, if ever used, it would mean a complete annihilation of the whole globe, on the life of on this globe, on the whole life on this globe. So such kind of weapons were either gradually eliminated by both these powerful countries, or they were eliminated in one stroke by both these powerful countries, and then there were different mechanisms set to observe and monitor whether these weapons have already been eliminated or not. So my dear students, in these two lectures we have discussed the concept of national power. What does it mean? What are some of its determinants? And what are the factors which we need to take care while evaluating the national power of a particular country? And then what are some of the checks over the national power of country A, country B, or any other powerful country, whether that country is a global power, whether it is a regional power. So this is all about this topic, and if you have got any questions, just post these questions in the comment section, so that because I go through the comments, so if the questions are there in the comment sections, I will either answer those in the comment sections, and then I will also answer during the question answer sessions in your class, which would be dedicated for this particular video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, press the subscribe button, press the bell icon, select the all notifications, so that you get regular feed from my videos, regular notifications of my new videos. Inshallah, see you in next vlog or in next lecture. Up till then, take care. Thank you for watching. Allah Hafiz.